Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Vauxhall in South London to Stratford in East London. This ride takes about 45 minutes and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey also takes around 45 minutes, so cycling is a perfectly good option for this fairly long trip. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to all those of you who support the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting at the foot of Vauxhall Bridge and we're going to use the cycle crossing here to get over Albert Embankment. This is a two-stage crossing, so make sure you've got a green light here as well as on the edge of the road. Two-stage crossings can be frustrating as you have to wait twice sometimes, but I go over this one pretty regularly and in my experience it's actually pretty painless to get over. The timings work reasonably well in both directions, I think. The left turn we just took into Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens required us to go onto the shared pavement for a second. The shared pavement is quite narrow and also used by people walking, so make sure you take that one with care. It would be much better to have a separate cycle lane heading into the park to prevent conflict on what is quite a narrow path there. I love the public realm improvements at this end of Vauxhall Walk. You can see all the planting, and when this was filmed in summer it was looking fantastic. I think Vauxhall Walk is a really great example of how just a little bit of greenery can make such a difference to how a street looks. Not having too many parking spaces as well, I think, really makes a difference and reduces the amount of clutter that you see on a street like this. It's quite a long ride today. If you know your London geography well, you'll know that Stratford is a pretty long way from Vauxhall, but we're going to do it in just 45 minutes, which, as I explained at the beginning, is not much longer and really about the same as it takes to get the tube there, which would probably be the way that most people made that journey by default in London. And by the way, since people tend to ask, I'm not a very fast cyclist. I think it's fair to say that I'm pretty average when it comes to speed, so you'll see me travelling at the sorts of speeds other people are around me, and also if you make this journey you can probably expect to do it in around 45 minutes as well. Although of course with longer trips like this they can vary a little bit because you might get lucky with the lights, you might get unlucky with the lights, that sort of thing. There are a couple of things to watch out for at the end of Sales Street here. The first is that I wouldn't use that little cycle lane there or you might end up hitting your head on a tree branch. The second is that to use this crossing you do have to press that button to make the light turn green unless someone else has already done it for you, which it seems that they had in that case. There's also some good news about Hercules Road, which we're on now. Lambeth Council, which manages the streets around here, is going to put in more planting at the sides of the road, which I think will make it look a lot more lush and a little bit less barren than it does now. That first section of it where we pulled into it is really wide and there's a lot of unused space, which I think will look a lot better with planting in it rather than just barren tarmac. Now we're going to use a cycle gate here. You see we have a green light here and that lets us into this box here. We then wait for a second green light, which you can see on the main traffic light there, and it lets us across to Bayliss Road, which has fantastic protected cycle lanes along it. On our journey today, we're going to be using 4 different official signed cycle routes. The first, which we're on now, is Cycleway 5, and that's mostly been a backstreet route, but there are some bits which are on protected or segregated cycle lanes, like the one that we're on now. The route is really easy to follow and it has a lot of wayfinding, so you can see that C5 is written on the ground or on those green and blue signs like the one that we saw on the lamppost just there. There's another cycle gate here, by the way, with the 2-stage lights. Don't worry about the non-segregated bits of this route, the streets are nice and quiet. This one, the cut, used to be really busy, but it's recently quietened down due to a closure that was put in just here, which prevents motor traffic from using it as a through route. Lambeth Council is also going to close a couple more streets around this area on Ufford Street and Webber Street, which will make the whole area even more quiet and effectively turn it into a low traffic neighbourhood. The second of 4 cycleways that we'll be using today, we're actually going to turn on to just here. This is cycleway 6, and it's a full protected lane which runs all the way from Elephant and Castle up to Farringdon, but we're going to use it to get across the River Thames on Blackfriars Bridge. As you can see, it's a 2-way protected cycle track of really wide width, and during peak commuting times this is absolutely rammed with people riding into central London for work. Cycleway 6 has a really nice connection with Cycleway 3, which runs mostly along the River Thames, and we'll be using that to get through the City of London and go east. We'll then use a relatively new connector route, which I'll show you, and that will take us onto Cycleway 2, which is a really long section of mostly protected lanes which runs all the way into Stratford. More on those two later. We're now about to cross Blackfriars Bridge, and a little bit about the history of the bridge. This is actually the second bridge on the site. The original was opened in 1769 and was originally known as the William Pitt Bridge after the Prime Minister, but when he fell out of favour the name was changed. It originally featured toll booths which were destroyed in rioting. The second bridge, which was built because of erosion problems with the first bridge, was opened in 1869 by Queen Victoria and then widened in 1910 to allow trams to cross. Obviously there are no trams now, and that space is what allows such a generous cycle lane today. The cycle lane was put in 2016. Now you may have noticed that we turned left here, and this is a little bit counterintuitive because we actually want to go east, which would have been right. But there's a little hairpin turn here, so we've gone down this slip road into the bridge. We've waited for a gap in the people cycling past. There's many people using this lane, as you can see, and we've now gone left again, or right, going back on our original course in a little bit of a U-turn. It's a little bit counterintuitive, so just make sure you remember that if you're not used to the layout of the bridge. We're now on Cycleway 3, which is our third cycleway of today. For the section that we'll be riding today, you can expect fully protected lanes like the one we're currently on, with one small exception, and that is the Castle Baynard Street tunnel just coming up here. Now, I do say that this isn't technically a protected cycle lane, although in practice it might as well be. It is a full street which is almost entirely used by people on bikes. The main traffic actually goes in the tunnel to the right here, and this tunnel has been given over to the cycleway. However, you do still need to keep half an eye out for cars here. You'll see these service entrances on the left that we've been passing. Those are the entrances for buildings along another street, but often they are used by service vehicles, so occasionally you will see a van or a car coming that way to access those buildings. It is usually dead quiet with no traffic, but don't be too surprised if you see someone driving down there. Now on the left here is the exit for Queen Street, which would take us up towards Bank. We're not going that way today, but I wanted to point it out because I wanted to mention that the Bank junction has been completely redesigned and has had most through traffic removed from it as well, so it's now a really useful location for cycling through the City of London. It opens up a lot of new connections which I will be showing off in future videos, so if that sounds like something that would be interesting to you, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't already, and click the bell icon so that you're alerted to future videos that I post. This section of Cycleway 3 is generally a dream. It's a 2-way protected cycle lane segregated from general traffic with a nice wide curb. So you can have a large lorry like that one driving past with another car on it, and it really wouldn't bother us at all. We feel completely segregated from general motor traffic, and I'd feel totally comfortable cycling on this section of the route with my son on my back, for example. Considering how central in London we are and how busy these streets often are, I think that's a really great feat, and I'd love to see more central London protected lanes like this opening up. I think the City of London does have plans for more like this on streets like Queen Victoria Street, and yeah, it would be just excellent to have these kind of routes opened up to all kinds of people who want to ride a bike, whether it's tourists, people going to work, or people getting around with their families. The only thing that can be a little bit frustrating about this section of route, which doesn't really show up in the video, is that there are quite a lot of traffic lights at junctions which can hold you up if you're unlucky with the lights. The timings aren't great for bikes and you can find yourself waiting for quite a while at an empty street, although on this occasion we've pretty much had a green wave, so it's all been really good. Now, I said that we were using 4 cycleways today, but it's actually 4.5. We're going to be going on a short stretch of lightly protected cycle lane here down Mansell Street, and we waited for the crossing and then we turn off left here down this one segregated lane. Now, this was only put in about a year ago or so, and it's actually a really useful link, linking cycleway 3, which we were just on, and cycleway 2, which we'll be heading to, which will be taking us down to Stratford. You can see it's a little bit of a bodge job with those shared pedestrian and cycle crossings, and the segregation isn't quite as emphatic as it was on the previous lane that we were on. I think these ones wouldn't protect you from a car, but they do still make you feel safe nonetheless, and in practice stop drivers from entering the cycle lane. Now, just coming up, there's another cycle gate like the ones that we were dealing with on cycleway 5. So here we wait for the green light, which lets us into this advanced stop line. We go here and we wait for another green light, which lets us across this junction. Now, that all worked fairly well and straightforward, but I should give a note of caution that at peak time, that cycle gate doesn't always work so well. When the roads are really busy around here, you'll often find cars stopped in the protected cycle box or also just stopped across the junction. It is really quite common to see, which is a shame. There are better ways of protecting junctions like that, and hopefully when that scheme is maybe revised with permanent materials, we'll see a much better design, which will give cyclists their own phase for crossing the junction. I should say that this building work here, which diverted us out of the cycle lane, is not normally there. It was only there when I came past, which meant that we had to cycle with general traffic for a second. We're now, of course, on cycleway 2, which is the 4th or 4.5 of our 4.5 cycleways today. Now, cycleway 2 is probably my least favourite of the cycleways that we've been on. It's mostly segregated like the lanes that we're on now, but there are also sections of it which lack segregation, like this one approaching the junction here, and also a couple of bits where you're required to use a bus lane for short stretches. Generally, it's reasonably comfortable, but when it can be busy down here, it does sometimes feel a little bit hectic. Now, while I was fully confident about cycling with my son on my back on cycleway 3, I think cycleway 2, I'd probably have second thoughts about it, to be honest. It's probably in need of a little bit more protection. One of the worst bits, in fact I'd probably say the worst bit of it, is actually this section running past Whitechapel Market. You can see that there's no protection at all. There are also parked cars and vans along the road, and we don't even get a bus lane for some of it, although that is quickly sorted out with a wide bus lane here. The reason that it lacks segregation going past the market is that when cycleway 2, or as it used to be known, Cycle Superhighway 2, was built, market traders objected to having a protected cycle lane past the market, and because they are a major political constituency in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, which we're in now, the protection was not installed, which I think is a real shame, as it does leave a significant gap in what is otherwise a pretty long and well protected cycle route, which goes all the way out to Stratford. Now, coming up in a second is a good example of how not to use a bus stop bypass. These guys just rode over the zebra crossing. What you should do is wait when people look like they're trying to get onto the bus stop island so that they can catch a bus. I think generally people are pretty considerate when they use those bus stop bypasses, and that's probably the worst example I've seen either on or off camera. I talked about this in my last video, so I won't go into too much detail, but this design of bus stop where the cycle track goes behind the waiting area is the best way to do bus stops, because it means that you don't have to overtake a stopped bus in traffic, which can feel really dangerous and put a lot of people off cycling. But given the design is slightly less convenient for pedestrians who have to cross the cycle track to get to the waiting area, like the one we're passing through here, I think it's really important for people riding past them to look out for pedestrians who are trying to cross and to give them priority on the crossings. As you can see, cycleway 2 uses a number of different types of segregation. Mostly we've got a curb, sometimes we're on a step track. Unfortunately, this section here is one of those examples where we're actually just in a bus lane. It's not as bad as the section outside Whitechapel Market, and in practice actually it does feel reasonably comfortable because the protected lane leads right into the bus lane and then leads straight into another protected lane like the one we're on here. So I wouldn't let that put you off too much. The other danger that you should just be aware of when using this cycle lane is that there are quite a lot of side roads going onto the cycle track. Not just roads, but also driveways and other crossovers which might have a vehicle poking out of them at any moment. So while you're riding down here, do just keep your wits about you and make sure that there's no drivers poking out. Now, today's route is pretty easy to follow, I think, mostly due to the fact it follows designated cycleways that we've talked about in detail, which mostly themselves run in a straight line and have good wayfinding. However, if you need a little bit of extra help, you can always download the free map of the route, which I linked to in the description. It's on a website called Komoot, where you can download it in a GPX file, which should work on whatever app or device you choose to use. It is a standard format. There is also another map which I should give a shout out to today, and that is the map of all the London cycle routes put together. I often get asked to do this, and I think a lot of people don't realise that it exists. But it's a viewer created map currently looked after by a nice guy called Isaac, who's done a little map of all the London cycle routes videos in one place. It's really useful because if you want to find a route that I've done to a particular place or along a particular corridor without having to scroll through all the videos on a list on YouTube, you can basically just look for it on the map there and it will link you to the correct video which you can then watch. The map has also had a little bit of a redesign recently so that the videos are sorted by year. That's because it was getting a little bit crowded with me basically just doing so many videos for a few years now. Thanks again, Isaac, for keeping the map updated, and thanks also to John who originally set it up. Earlier I mentioned that there are points where you need to look out for drivers poking their nose out of side roads and crossovers, and just coming up here is a really good example of that. There are lots of cars always pulling in and out of this Texaco petrol station, and you can see one appearing at the exit as the light changes. This one was relatively well behaved, but not all of them are, and you can end up with them poking their nose out across the lane, so do be really careful of that spot there. One of the things I like about cycling through London, and just London in general, is the wide mix of architectural styles. You can get really modern buildings next to sort of old medieval stuff as well. And coming up on our right is a pretty big example of that. It's a relatively picturesque old church called Bow Church, situated just in front of a massive flyover. It's kind of a weird thing to see, to be honest. Now, this flyover is important for us as we'll be going under it on the Bow roundabout. There's a cycle gate here like the other ones you've been through. We go through the green light, stop at a red light and wait for another green light. It's really important that you wait for the lights at this roundabout. It's not safe to proceed when the lights are red there, even if it looks like it might be, as traffic does come around it incredibly fast. We're then dumped into a section of painted cycle lane, which really should be protected by wands or curbs, but fortunately it's only a relatively short stretch before we rejoin the protected lanes. Of note is the terrible road surface going through here and all the sand and dirt and grit from nearby construction which has just been left in the road, and also in the cycle lane itself, which is really not good at all. Like all of Cycleway 2, when you're travelling in the opposite direction, you're on the other side of the road. These are one-way cycle lanes. It's worth saying that here because the road is so wide that you can barely see the opposite side of the road and the protected lane on that side of the road. In fact, when the Bow flyover is in the middle of the road, the protected lane in the opposite direction is actually on the other side of the flyover, and you can't see it at all because it's blocked by the flyover. Don't worry though, the route is symmetrical and you get a very similar treatment going in the opposite direction with the same sorts of protected lanes that you get in this direction. As we head into the last stretch of our route today, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. If you like the work that the channel is doing and you'd like to chuck us a couple of quid as well, you can find a link to the Patreon page in the description below the video. It's much appreciated and it helps me keep producing these videos pretty much every week. Now, the street that we've been on for the last while is called Stratford High Street, which is kind of a strange name for it to have today, as it doesn't really feel like a high street, it more feels like quite a major highway. Fortunately, it does get a little bit nicer as we get to the end of the road. You can see there's a little bit more vegetation coming up, and the street becomes not so wide. The cycle lanes also become incredibly high quality as we get to Stratford Town Centre. This is much nicer than the sort of stuff we were using for the last 5 or 10 minutes or so at the end of Cycleway 2. And it would be great to see Cycleway 2 redone with this kind of quality of lane the whole way through it. I think it would make such a big difference to the level of comfort on those lanes and also just make it a bit safer and more consistent. Coming up on our left is Stratford Bus Station with its, I think, pretty cool and futuristic tent design. And on our right is the Stratford Centre, which is the original Stratford shopping centre, slightly overshadowed by Westfield across the road. And here is Stratford Station, so we have made it to central Stratford all the way from Vauxhall. And as you can see from the map, that was a pretty direct route. And as you saw in the video, it was more or less comfortable the whole way. We did Cycleway 5, Cycleway 6, Cycleway 3 and Cycleway 2. Let me know in the comments what you think of that, what your favourite bit was, and maybe some things that I missed if you spotted them. You always do. And don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. It does give it a boost and help other people find it. And if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button as well so that you're alerted to new videos as I post them more or less every week. Thanks again to all of those on the Patreon, and if you're thinking about contributing as well, you can find a link in the description below the video where you can chuck us a couple of quid. Thanks very much, and I'll see you guys all again next time.